So probably to address that first point I had, using the best chart rather than the best looking. We do have help on that on our wiki. So this is an example of, on our Yellowfin wiki, we have a bit of a chart decision map. So telling you what kind of data you might have and what kind of chart might match that. This is also helped by the auto chart feature in Yellowfin. So as you're dropping in fields and metrics, it's going to try and show you a visualization that might best fit that. So there's two different ways that Yellowfin's trying to help you with your chart selection. Regarding the other point I made about pie charts, just to give you a bit more context on that, you can see where pie charts are used in the wrong situation. It can be confusing and give the wrong kind of conclusions for users. So even in this example here, it can be a lot harder when you're looking at a pie chart to determine is A bigger than B based on viewing as a circle, as opposed to something like a simple column chart here where we're viewing side by side. We can instantly see which are the larger values, how they compare in terms of percentages, and we can probably find it easier to make a decision or generate ideas based on this set of charts as opposed to the pie charts. So this might be an example where it's better to go with something else other than a pie chart or visualization. And lastly, just to address the uncluttered, if we're looking at some examples of how that can be done, we have two here side by side. So the first on the left is more of a chart that could be a little bit too much for a user. For example, we might have too many scales, we might have too many labels on the x-axis, we might have too many grid lines, which is a little bit too much information. It detracts from what I'm trying to achieve with this chart. Whereas on the right hand side, I might have gone and reduced the particular x-axis a little bit. So use something like a time series which cleans up the values. We've reduced the scales here so it's a little bit easier to interpret. Maybe reduced the grid lines, and even something like using your rounded lines to make it a little bit more easy to interpret as well. So really generally uncluttering those reports so the user can gain a lot more benefit from that more quickly than they would with a large dense chart or visualization. Another thing we do recommend from a Yellowfin perspective is making use of the dates and the timestamps within Yellowfin. So dates and times are quite flexible fields and metrics that you can use within your reports. So as well as doing things like using them for breakdowns or dimensional breakdowns and group bys, they're also very effective for using as filters to restrict time periods, to add interactivity, and flexibility for the slicing and dicing of your data. But one thing you can also get out of using date fields and timestamps is some of the extra functionality that comes with it. So when you have a date or a timestamp in your charts and visualizations, that automatically means you can use your time series functionality, which in itself enables you to use things like extra functions. So it could be things like unit selection within a chart. So you could start by seeing your report as a yearly report, but you can as something like a daily report that you can roll up to maybe month to quarter to year on the fly within the report, or even use something like a time slider to select time periods or years or months based on dragging a time slider around the visualization. Also, this does help you, or does help the users to better understand gaps in the data. So probably to explain that particular comment there, what I've done is put together two charts side by side. The one on the left, the one here that we see, is using just a categorical view of the data, so there's no time series enabled. So what you see here is all the values are plotted next to each other, so we can see January, February, June, and we can see that this assumes that June comes after February, so there's no real representation of the time elapsed there. Whereas on the right hand side we have used time series functionality, which is going to then space these out appropriately. So we can see that there has been an appropriate amount of time between February and June, and that's displayed in the chart for you. So you get a better idea of how your data is flowing over a time period rather than just the series of numbers that have come across. So that's probably giving you just a brief explanation of how you can show those gaps in data a little bit more easily. And that could highlight things like we don't have data populating properly for these time periods, or maybe why don't we have invoicing amounts for these periods. It can instantly generate some questions for you that you may not have noticed by using categorical line charts or bar charts. Another thing we do tend to highlight within report creation is really making the reports easy to understand. Probably the main focus of Yellowfin itself is to make that BI reporting and report creation a lot easier for just regular business users as well as technical users. So being able to make those reports easily understandable really feeds into that particular methodology. So one thing we do try to recommend and bring into any of the reports we create is adding a lot of information to help that understanding. So adding things like your labels, your scales, your headings into your reports, and that really just gives you a better understanding of the report data and also the context of the visualizations and the data. This often leads to less confusion over things like your fields, your metrics, your visualizations. So maybe which metric are you looking at? You might have 3 metrics in a chart, but you don't know which one applies to the questions you're asking. So if you're looking at an example of, maybe a simple example of making your charts a little bit easier to understand using labels, this might be a good example there for you. So we've put together a combination chart, so it's an overlay of 2 different metrics. We have brought in multiple axes and multiple scales. So what we've done is we've added in instantly some labels, some headings there, so we can see, we know exactly which metric is on each of these axes. We can see things like the label, so instantly we know the red is our counter, our age is the blue, and even things like if we do have multiple charts within a report, we can add in things like headings or titles, so you know exactly which chart is focusing on which particular question or issue. So really giving a bit of extra information there so you can easily interpret and understand. But as we mentioned in a slide previously before, trying not to overdo it with too much information as well. So it is a bit of a balancing act between having enough information but not overawing the user who's viewing this. One other thing we do try to bring in is the use of contrasting and comparing data sets. So within Yellowfin, that's done in the most easy way to do that is using multiple data sources or views. Within Yellowfin, you have functionality called subqueries, which allow you to combine multiple views or multiple sets of data into the one report. And what this really does is it creates insight into relationships between those data sets that you do have. So there may have been relationships there or different ways that they relate that you may not have seen before. And this can help to highlight those particular items. Also, what this does give you is more flexibility in the way that you can structure your reports. So you can bring in 3 different sets of data rather than having to go and join all that data at the database level. You also have the ability to use what we call basic subqueries, where you're actually joining a set of data back on itself, and maybe you need to do that to structure a report in a particular way, or bring in a different aggregated set of data into your report. So that really adds flexibility there and allows you to bring in those multiple data sets to look how they're collaborating, how they're matching up, how they're contrasting, and how they're comparing as well. We also do try to make our reports very reusable, and this is really looking towards not having duplicated reports. And one way you can do this is to make use of the filter functionality that's in Yellowfin to add a lot of flexibility to your reports and to your content. And this really adds flexibility in the way that you can slice and dice your reports, making them usable by a number of different maybe business units or users or different time periods. So you could have for your report a set of 10 filters or even just one filter that can be chopped and changed based on the user's individual preference. So you could have a report that's used to view a particular business unit over time, but at the same time someone else is viewing another business unit over another time period, and that's a single report that's being used multiple times and adding flexibility. Obviously in terms of maintenance, you have one report to maintain instead of three maybe. So an example, if you were looking at something like bringing a report into a dashboard, you might see a really reusable report or dashboard like this, where you have a number of different filters that you can individually select and change and refresh, and that can allow you to apply those scenarios or situations to your data sets. We also do recommend bringing across established norms, so things like being able to respect the accepted colors and styles within an organization. So really making sure that you can apply, if you're going to use things like your conditional formatting, applying styles that match the meanings and the values that you have established within a business or an organization. So that could be as something as easy as anything that's highlighted in green is good, anything that's red is bad. That could be a commonly held notion within an organization, and something you might then want to apply to your reports. And what this can do, this can help avoid confusion when you're trying to interpret the reports, because straight away you can see this is green, okay, it's okay, these two are red, I need to address them. And this could be done in a number of different ways. It could be conditionally formatting, so making a cell red or blue or yellow, even adding things like ticks or crosses, thumbs up or thumbs down. Things like that can be easily added in. Even in terms of color coding your particular charts, so making sure that if something's in blue, then that needs to be investigated, and that could be an organizational norm there. And really what you're trying to do is make sure that this formatting can quickly direct users to the most valuable information or the most important figures that are found in your reports. Really trying to make it quick for the decision-making process. So an example of that here might be something like the KPI dashboard you see in this screenshot. So it could be a case of where instantly we look at this, we see 2 green up arrows, which means 2 of those are good, but instantly 3 red arrows are bad. So we can instantly start analyzing those 3 items, and we might be able to instantly disregard those 2 green ones. So really allowing the user to make quick decisions and quick movements based on conditional formatting via accepted norms and styles within the organization. Probably the last one we do put across as a best practice for report creation is the monitoring and the review process. So this could be done both during the actual report development process and also after. And what it really allows you to do there is bring in a step where you can review the content regularly to make sure it's the most effective, it's the most useful content that you can put forward. So the input from other users maybe who are going to use those reports, or managers that are going to draw information from those. This is going to help shape the report needs for the time being, and also for any future changes. And so this really makes sure that your reports are going to answer the questions or cover the requirements that you've set out, and really make sure you're on the right track, so you're not putting a report out there that has zero value for your managers, for your report consumers. Another way that you can effectively monitor reports, and this is probably post-report creation, is by using some of the reporting and user behavior that's logged within Yellowfin. So there are a range of events tables in Yellowfin that you can access to pull in information around user and report or content behavior. So this can tell you, okay, this report I created for the last month, this report has been accessed by 20 people a day. So we can see this report report is instantly being used, it looks to be very effective. Whereas if this report was not viewed by anyone in 3 months, maybe it needs to be changed or deleted or replaced. So helping to guide you in the ways that you, in the content that you're putting out there and how effective that content is. So that's probably a good way to be able to continually monitor and review the content to make sure it fits those questions that you're trying to answer and covers all the key requirements that you might have for your reporting. And so what that does, that brings us to the end of our session, which was report best practice for Yellowfin. Our next session will be lesson 2, which will be focusing on dashboard best practice, and obviously lesson 3 after that will be metadata best practice, so focusing on views, view creation, and how to manage that. But thank you for joining our session today.